That warm afternoon in Atlanta, the downtown restaurant buzzed with life. It was a fancy place where every chair gleamed and every waiter moved with clockwork precision. The manager greeted important guests while the staff rushed to serve expensive meals. Then the glass door opened and a tall man stepped in. He wore a simple gray hoodie, loose jeans, and sneakers. No gold watch, no bodyguards. He smiled politely at the hostess. "Table for one, please." His voice was deep, calm, and warm. The hostess led him to a seat by the window, completely unaware that this quiet man was someone very few could ignore, the legendary Big Shaq. At the counter, a waiter named Eddie watched him sit down. He whispered to his coworker, "He looks lost. Doesn't even fit in here." His coworker just shrugged. "Just serve him, man. It's your section." Eddie rolled his eyes and lazily walked over. He stopped by the table, looking down at the man. "You sure you're in the right restaurant?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. The tall man just smiled kindly. "Yeah, I've been here before. It's one of my favorite places." Eddie raised his eyebrows. "Favorite, huh? You must really like expensive food." The man's calm never broke. "Good food is always worth it," he said. "And the service too, I hope." Eddie forced a smile, dropped the menu on the table, and walked off, muttering, "Can't believe people like that come in here thinking they belong." The hostess shot him a disapproving look, but he just laughed quietly to his friend. "Come on, look at him. Probably can't even afford the steak." Meanwhile, Shaq sat quietly, watching the world go by. He didn't seem bothered. In fact, he looked almost amused. He picked up the menu and smiled faintly. He knew every dish on it because he was one of the silent owners of the restaurant. When Eddie returned, he leaned against the table. "So what'll it be?" Shaq smiled. "I'll take the special today and a glass of water." Eddie frowned. "Just water?" "Yes," Shaq said softly. "Just water, thank you." As he walked away, Eddie laughed to another waiter. Water, of course, probably trying to save money for the tip. 10 minutes later, he brought the meal and placed it on the table carelessly before walking away without a word. Shaq took a bite and nodded. The food was perfect, but the tension in the room was not. When Shaq finished, he waved down a passing waitress. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Could you please call the manager? I'd like to speak with him." Eddie smirked from across the room. "There it is," he told his coworker. "He's going to complain about the bill, I guarantee it." A few moments later, the manager arrived, smiling professionally. "Good afternoon, sir. I hope everything was to your satisfaction." Shaq smiled back. "Everything was perfect. The food, the atmosphere, even the service gave me something to think about." The manager was confused. "Was there anything else I can do for you?" Shaq paused, his eyes glancing toward Eddie, who was now laughing with another table. Then he looked back at the manager and said quietly, "Actually, yes. There's something we should talk about. Privately." As Shaq stood up, his tall frame drawing stares, some people started whispering, "Is that Shaquille O'Neal?" Eddie's laughter died instantly. His face went pale. As Shaq followed the manager to the back office, he turned once toward Eddie, smiled, and said, "We'll talk after this." His voice wasn't angry, it was calm, and that calm made Eddie's stomach twist. He had just realized the man he mocked and disrespected wasn't just a customer, but the owner, the man who signed his paycheck, and for the first time all day Eddie felt very, very small. The next morning, the story of that strange, quiet customer was already buzzing among the restaurant staff. The hostess whispered about how the manager had whisked him away to the back office. The chefs murmured that he looked familiar, and the dishwashers swore they'd never seen anyone that tall move so calmly. But Eddie, the waiter who had served him so rudely, just brushed it off. "He's just some tall dude with an attitude," he told the others, smirking. "Probably came to complain because I didn't smile enough." What Eddie didn't know was that the man he had insulted wasn't just some tall dude. He was Big Shaq, the part owner of the very restaurant Eddie worked in. Shaq had stayed quiet, letting the night pass, but he hadn't forgotten the way Eddie had looked down on him. The cold plate, the sarcastic tone, the sheer lack of respect. It all replayed in his mind, not with anger, but with a deep sense of disappointment. By noon, Shaq returned. This time he wore a clean black suit, simple yet commanding respect, just by the way he carried himself. Most of the staff didn't recognize him at first. He looked different, confident, sharp, and quiet in a way only truly powerful people can be. As he entered, everyone straightened up except for Eddie, who was busy chatting near the counter and didn't even glance his way. The manager rushed out from the back, nearly tripping over his own feet. "Sir, you're back," he stammered with a nervous smile. "We weren't expecting—" Shaq raised a hand gently. "Relax, I just came for a quick lunch, and maybe a chat with the staff later." The manager nodded eagerly. "Of course. Anything you need." Shaq was seated at the exact same table as the day before. A few customers started whispering, some recognizing him. "Hey, isn't that Shaquille O'Neal?" one man murmured. "What's he doing here?" another asked. Eddie, still completely oblivious, sauntered over with his usual fake smile. "Back again?" he said. "Guess you liked the food after all." Shaq smiled faintly. "Yes, the food was great. The service could be better." Eddie didn't catch the underlying tone. "Yeah, we've been short-staffed. You know how it is, hard to find good help these days," he said casually. Shaq chuckled quietly. "Yeah, finding good help and keeping it can be tough." When he ordered, Shaq spoke politely. "I'll take the same special. And a water, please." Eddie smirked. "Still just water?" "Sure thing, big guy," and walked away, shaking his head. But one of the younger waiters pulled Eddie aside, his voice low and urgent. "Bro, what are you doing? Do you have any idea who that is?" Eddie frowned. "Some tall customer who likes cheap drinks." The younger waiter leaned in. "That's Shaq, man. Shaquille O'Neal. He owns this place." Eddie laughed out loud. "Get out of here. Shaq doesn't own this restaurant." The waiter's face turned dead serious. "He does, dude. I heard the manager say it last week. He bought a share in the franchise. That's his seat you just served him in." Eddie froze mid-laugh. The blood drained from his face. He turned slowly toward Shaq, who was sitting quietly, just scrolling on his phone, looking completely relaxed. Suddenly, that calmness felt terrifying. Eddie swallowed hard. "You're kidding," he whispered. But the look on the other waiter's face confirmed it. The room suddenly felt smaller, the chatter of customers faded, and every step Eddie took back toward the table felt heavier than lead. His confidence, his arrogance, it all evaporated, replaced by sheer panic. When he reached Shaq's table with the food, his hands trembled slightly. "Here's your special, sir," he said, placing the plate down with extreme care. Shaq looked up, his gaze steady but not harsh. "Thank you, Eddie," he said calmly. Eddie blinked. You know my name?" Shaq smiled faintly. "Of course I do. I make it a point to know the people who work for me." The words hit Eddie like a lightning strike. His mouth went dry. Sir, I didn't know. I thought—" Shaq raised a hand, stopping him. "You thought I wasn't important," he said softly. "You thought you could choose who deserved respect." Eddie's face flushed bright red. "Sir, I swear I didn't mean—" Shaq shook his head. "You don't need to swear. I've seen everything I needed to." His voice wasn't angry. It was calm, and that calm felt 1,000 times worse than shouting. By now, the manager had returned, breathless. "Sir, is everything all right?" Shaq looked at him, then back at Eddie. "Everything's fine. I just wanted to see how my employees treat guests when they don't already think the owner OS watching." The restaurant fell silent. Every employee froze. The customers watched, wide-eyed. Eddie's voice shook. "Sir, I'm so sorry I didn't recognize you." Shaq's tone was steady. "You don't need to recognize someone to respect them." The manager bowed his head. "Mr. O'Neal, please forgive this." Shaq interrupted gently. "I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed. You can train someone to serve, but you can't teach them hard unless they want to learn." He stood up slowly, towering over the table, but his presence felt warm, not intimidating. "I'll be back later," he said quietly. "We'll have a staff meeting then, And with that, he walked out, leaving behind a heavy silence. As the door closed, Eddie sank into a chair at an empty table, burying his face in his hands. "What did I just do?" he whispered. For the first time, he understood that respect wasn't just part of the job. It was the job. And the man he had mocked as being out of place had just shown him exactly where he stood. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one. The air inside the restaurant felt different after that day. The chatter was quieter, the laughter thinner, and every waiter seemed to stand a little straighter. Word had spread fast. The man Eddie had disrespected wasn't just a celebrity. He was the owner, Big Shaq himself. People still whispered about it behind the counter. "Did you see his face when Shaq said, 'I know your name'?" one server muttered. "Man, I thought Eddie was gonna pass out," another replied. But Eddie wasn't laughing anymore. He had barely slept, replaying that moment over and over. His pride had shattered in front of everyone. For the first time, he saw how ugly his own arrogance looked. Every time he walked past the window where Shaq had sat, his stomach turned. He wished he could go back and undo that one awful day. A few days later, the manager gathered all staff for an emergency meeting. Everyone stood nervously, glancing at the door. Then the door opened and Shaq walked in. He was towering, calm, dressed simply in a dark shirt and jeans. But even without the fancy suit, the room went silent the second he stepped inside. He looked around at his employees, cooks, waiters, cleaners, everyone, and then his gaze landed on Eddie, who lowered his head instantly. "Good afternoon, everyone," Shaq said, his deep voice steady. "I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm here to talk." A collective sigh filled the room, but the tension didn't disappear. Shaq continued. "I've built a lot of businesses in my life, and I've made mistakes too. But one thing I've always believed: respect costs nothing, but it can make or break everything." He paused, walking slowly through the group. "When I came here last week, I didn't come as a boss. I came as a customer. I wanted to see how my restaurant felt when I wasn't Shaq the celebrity. I wanted to know if people came here for good food or for good hearts." Eddie's hands trembled, his throat tight. Shaq stopped near him, not too close, not too far. "And what I found," Shaq said softly, "was that sometimes we forget that every person who walks through that door deserves the same respect, whether they be wearing a suit or sneakers." No one said a word. The only sound was the soft hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Shaq turned toward the rest of the staff. "I'm not angry at anyone. I'm grateful, because this taught me something too. It reminded me that success can blind us, not just CEOs, but everyone. You start thinking you can tell who's worth your kindness by how they look, but you never really know who's sitting in front of you, do you?" The staff murmured softly, some nodding in agreement. Shaq looked back at Eddie, who could barely lift his eyes. "Eddie," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you made a mistake, but we all do. What matters now is what you do after it." Eddie swallowed hard, his voice shaking. "Sir, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I thought you were just another customer. I didn't mean to treat anyone that way." Shaq nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said. "But don't just say sorry to me. Say it through your actions. Every customer you serve from now on is your chance to do better." Then he turned to the manager. "I want to start a new rule here. From today, no one is treated differently. Not by what they wear, not by their accent, not by their skin. Every guest is family, and every employee is too." The manager nodded firmly. "Yes, sir, we'll make it happen." Shaq smiled faintly, his tone softening. "Good. Because at the end of the day, a restaurant doesn't just serve food. It serves respect." As the meeting ended, Shaq clapped Eddie gently on the shoulder before walking out. The gesture wasn't punishment, it was forgiveness. But it burned deeper than anger ever could. Later that day, as the lunch rush began, Eddie took his place at the same table where Shaq had sat. He wiped it clean slowly, his reflection staring back at him in the polished surface. It wasn't the pride he saw anymore. It was a man who learned something the hard way. A customer walked in, a delivery driver in dusty work clothes, looking nervous. Eddie approached him with a genuine smile. "Good afternoon, sir," he said warmly. "Welcome. Let me get you the best seat." The man blinked in surprise. "You don't have to, I'm just grabbing a quick meal," Eddie smiled. "Doesn't matter, everyone deserves good service." As the customer sat, the manager watched from across the room, a small smile forming. He whispered to the hostess, "Looks like he's learning." Hours later, when Eddie stepped outside after his shift, he found Shaq leaning against a black SUV, waiting. "Hey, boss," Eddie said nervously. "I didn't expect—" Shaq smiled. "I came to see for myself." Eddie looked down. "Did I do better today?" Shaq nodded. "Much better," he said simply. "You see, respect's like basketball. You don't win by showing off. You win by teamwork, by playing fair." Eddie laughed softly, still embarrassed. "I'll remember that." Shaq chuckled. "Good, because you never know who's sitting at your table next time." As Shaq climbed into his SUV, the evening sun glowed against the restaurant windows. Eddie watched him drive off, his heart lighter than it had been in days. For the first time, he understood that humility wasn't weakness, it was strength. Inside, the restaurant buzzed again, but the energy had changed. There was laughter, warmth, and something new in the air. Respect. The kind that no paycheck or title could buy. A month had passed since the day Big Shaq taught his staff, and especially Eddie, the most valuable lesson of all. The once cold and prideful waiter had changed. He moved differently now, calm, patient, and genuine. The staff noticed it too. The man who used to complain about customers and brag about tips now smiled at everyone, no matter how they looked or what they ordered. The restaurant itself had transformed. It felt warmer, livelier. The whole energy had shifted. Word spread quickly that this wasn't just a fancy place. It was a place where people were treated right, where kindness was part of the menu. Customers started coming back not just for the food, but for the feeling. Even the chef joked, "Looks like respect adds flavor." One Saturday morning, as the restaurant prepared for another busy day, the manager walked in holding a letter. "Eddie," he said, "you've got mail." The waiter blinked, confused. "For me?" "He rarely got mail." The manager smiled. "Yeah, it looks important. It came with the owner's signature." Eddie froze. Shaq's name at the bottom of an envelope was enough to make his hands tremble. He opened it carefully. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "Eddie, I've been watching from afar. Proud of the way you turn things around. Real leadership starts with humility, not titles. Come meet me at the new location tomorrow. We're opening something special, and I want you there. Shaquille O'Neal." Eddie stared at the paper, speechless. The kitchen staff crowded around him. "Dude, are you getting promoted?" one whispered. "Maybe he's giving you your job back as head of respect," another teased. Eddie laughed nervously, but his heart was pounding. The next morning, he arrived at a newly renovated restaurant downtown, its name shining in golden letters, Shaq's Table. Inside, everything looked fresh, sleek wooden designs, an open kitchen, and staff that greeted him warmly. In the middle of the room stood Shaq, towering as always, wearing a broad smile. "There he is," he said, "my favorite waiter." Eddie blushed. "Sir, please, I don't deserve—" Shaq waved him off. "That's where you're wrong, Eddie. You earned it." They sat together as Shaq explained his new project. "I'm opening this place not just to serve food, but to serve opportunities. I want this to be a second-chance restaurant, a place where people who've made mistakes, just like you did, can rebuild themselves." Eddie listened, his chest tightening. "Sir, that's incredible." Shaq smiled. "And I want you to help me run it." Eddie's eyes widened. "Run it? You mean—" Shaq nodded. "Assistant manager. You'll train new staff, make sure no one forgets what respect means. You've lived it, you've learned it, now it's your turn to teach it." For a long moment, Eddie couldn't speak. He looked down at his hands, remembering the day he'd called this very man a broke customer. And now that same man was giving him a second chance at life. Tears filled his eyes. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. "You didn't have to do this." Shaq's deep voice was warm. "That's where you're wrong again, Eddie. We all have to do this. Kindness is a team sport." The grand opening of Shaq's table drew media attention. Cameras flashed, reporters crowded the entrance, but Shaq didn't talk about fame or money. He stood on the stage with Eddie beside him and said, "This place isn't about luxury, it's about respect. Everyone here deserves a second chance, including me, including all of us." After the event, as the evening sun painted the city gold, Shaq said softly to Eddie, "You know, people will forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel." Eddie nodded. "I understand that now, sir, I finally do." Shaq grinned. "Good, because this time you're not just serving tables, you're serving examples." As Shaq walked to his car, he turned one last time. "One more thing, Eddie," he said. "When someone walks in wearing sneakers or a hoodie, don't judge them. They might just be your next boss." Eddie laughed. "Or my next friend." Shaq smiled. "Exactly." Eddie looked back at the restaurant, feeling at peace for the first time in years. The man who had once disrespected a stranger now led others by that same lesson, that respect costs nothing but changes everything. And somewhere in the distance, Shaq's deep laugh echoed through the city, not as a celebrity, but as a teacher. Proof that true greatness doesn't shine through wealth or fame, but through humility, forgiveness, and the courage to lift others higher.